No. Okay. So on July 4th, we started talking about the sugya of hostages in Halacha. So I'm going to try to give like a recap for whoever was not there to bring them up to speed. Whoever is there will continue. I just want to start. Then on July 4th, we spoke about the story of the Merami Rotenberg. We spoke about, historical episodes of hostage taking and the halachas that were brought out from those sugyas. Now I just want to tell a story that happened not too long ago. In 1970, there was a terrorist group called the PLFP. Everyone's heard of it, the Popular Front for Palestinian Liberation, founded by a very chashuv young man named George Habash. He was like, a competitor with Yasser Arafat for like the soul of the Palestinian people. And in the 70s, before TSA and all this airport security was a thing, him and his Hasidim hijacked a bunch of planes. And in 1970, they hijacked 4 different planes and brought them to Dawson's Field, which was like a World War II airfield that was left over outside Amman, Jordan. They brought 4 planes there with hundreds of hostages. And the reason why this was like a Bakanta story and a famous story is because on that plane, one of the planes, TWA flight 471, I think, that was flying from Berlin, had on it Rav Hutner, his wife, his daughter Rebbetzin David, and her husband, and more. One second, Rabbi Yosef Harari Raful from Ateret Torah was there with his wife, 2 of his sons, Bust and his wife. There was a big cadre of very, very Haredi from well-known Bakantat mention who were on that plane. Now they ended up in Dawson's Field right outside Amman, Jordan, where the terrorists started going through everybody's papers, seeing who's who, what's what. Rabbi Yankel Drillman was on the plane. Reb Meir Fund was on the plane, and other Ravim Flappers. A lot of from people were on this plane. There was 2 children who were flying like unaccompanied minors, flying on the flight. One of them had an Israeli passport, a little girl. Rabbi Yankel Drillman, I believe he says this over, he ate her passport because he thought that if they would see an Israeli passport, it would be dangerous. And Taka people, they found like Israeli Hebrew documents on them, they were much more severe to. He ate her passport. So, he soaked it in water and he ate it. It's water, paper is edible in a pinch. Anyhow, so this was the group that ended up on Dawson's Field in the 1970s. They ended up ultimately being there for, I think, almost a month. The terrorists split them into different groups. Reb Hutner, who had like a contract in his pocket he was in the middle of buying an apartment in Yerushalayim at the time. He had like a contract for buying an apartment. They were very upset at him. They separated him. They wanted to shave his beard. Ultimately, they let him keep it. But they were separated in different groups. Now, the question arose as follows. Rav Hutner had some wealthy Talmidim at the time, some very wealthy Talmidim, and they reached out to the State Department that they'll put together, X amount of millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, whatever the crazy sum that would make a difference at that point was, and they'll free Rav Hutner from captivity. They'll buy his freedom. He was like with the last group that was kept there. Now, ultimately, the Shaila ended up being a moot point because the State Department said that they're not negotiating financial deals with terrorists, and the State Department didn't allow the buyback of Rav Hutner. So ultimately, they had to release some terrorists, some Swedish prisoners who were imprisoned in Sweden, and some in other places, and it took like 6 weeks until all these hostages were released. But when this Shiloh was discussed, I think it was even brought to the Meyatzes, because there is different whispers of what the Nidin was back and forth. And the Nidin was about if he's a Talmud Chacham, we spoke about this last time, and I'll go into it again. If he's Talmud Chacham, that could be an exception, and etc. And ultimately, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, it seems, was against it. Surprisingly, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in the meeting came out against collecting money, putting together money to free Rav Hutner. And his rationale was that, and this is very pertinent to today, actually, his rationale was we're in the middle of a war. Meaning, the Jews and these terrorists are in the middle of a war, and by putting money in your enemy's hand, ultimately contributing to your enemy doing more and more damage. You're paying for the next 20 terrorist attacks or whatever it's going to cost to finance the next round of terror. So you're paying for the next round of terror that you're not allowed to do. That was Rabbi Yaakov's position. Now ultimately it didn't end up being relevant because the State Department didn't allow it. Now, so let's just recap what the shmuz would be and get ultimately to Rabbi Yaakov's point. So we mentioned last week that there's a Mishnah in Gittin that says, Mishnah Gittin Daf Mem Hey says there's a din, you're not allowed to save captives for more than they're worth. The Gemara brings 2 different reasons for this din. One reason is because of the oil at Tzibur, it's going to be if everything's gonna be that expensive, the tzibur's resources are finite, and you're gonna tax the tzibur to a standard that they can't deal with. And the second rationale that the Gemara says is le'ligruve inchi. We don't want the terrorist or the kidnappers to receive the motivation to do more of this. Meaning, if you reward them, you give them a lot of payment when they capture somebody, you reward them for this bad behavior, they're going to want to do more of it. And based on these two rationales is why the Gemara says it's asur. Now, the Gemara is not machriya between these two tzaddim. The Gemara doesn't say which one of these is the actual reason. And because of this, the Rosh and the Rif say lahedya, that the Gemara is not machriya, and therefore you have to be machmer like both tzaddim. Meaning, even though there can be nafkaminas in these two different reasons, you have to be machmer like both tzaddim because the Gemara was not machriya. To take it a step further, the Rambam and Pashtus the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Pidin Shvun, who's quoting the Rambam's lashon, seem to hold that the primary reason that the Gemara says is the reason of you don't want to feed the vicious cycle, you don't want to make motivation for them to keep taking hostages. That's how the Rambam seems to paskin, and therefore the Rambam says, like a halacha psuka, ein paidin asashru yinesim echlei demeim. You're not allowed to redeem captives for more than they're worth. The le'ligruve, we don't want the captive industry to pick up steam. We don't want this kidnapping industry to pick up steam, so therefore you're not allowed to. And this is something that's badik u'menosa. You could see many old chuvas. Back in the day, there was a group of people called the Tartars. The Tartars, they lived like in the furthest reaches of Russia, like they bordered with Poland and Germany, and they had, like over a period of 40 years, I think they did 75 captive hostage raids. They would go like into Poland and kidnap tens of thousands of hostages and sell them as slaves, to the point where in the I guess this is the 1600s, there was as many slaves being captured in the backwaters of Russia and Poland and being sold in the Ottoman Empire as there was being taken from Africa and brought across the Atlantic to the United States. Just to give you a musik of meaning when you make a slave trade, when it becomes worth it, it becomes worth it. So this is how the Rambam paskins and how the Shulchan Aruch seems to paskin. So now we mentioned last week that there's some Gemaras that seem to not stem with this. There's a Gemara of Rabbi Shua that said Rabbi Shua saw a child who looked like he had a lot of potential, who was locked up in prison, and Rabbi Shua said, I'll give whatever money it takes in the world to free this child because he could be something great. Now Taisvis right away asks the question, and the Ramban and the Meiri, other Rishonim, they ask the question, are you allowed to? You're not allowed to. What do you mean? How can Rabbi Shua ben Chananya say, I'm going to give all the money in the world? There's a cap to how much you're allowed to save captives for. And Taisvis has a few different terutzim. Taisvis, in a few different places, has a few different terutzim. Taisvis says, in one place, that he was a Talmud Chacham. This kid was a future Talmud Chacham. A Talmud Chacham you're allowed to. Taisvis says in another place, that it was Sakanas Nefashis. This child could have been killed if he was left in prison. And when the Sakanas Nefashis, you're allowed to do it. Taisvis says in a third place, a third teretz, Taisvis says, is that during a Shas Mulchama, like it was then, but after the Churban, which is when Rabbi Shua ben Chananya lived, it was a Shas Mulchama. In a Shas Mulchama, all bets are off. You're not feeding the kidnapping industry by giving money. I mean, they have all the motivation in the world, and they're doing what they're doing already. The world is wild already, and it doesn't matter what you do. And that again could be a very relevant argument to today's days, where all the motivation is baked into the cake already. Everyone has the motivation they need. The sides are all drawn already. Okay, now this is what we covered last time. This is the basic different sugi with the exceptions. Now, so now let's figure this out how this goes lamaisa. So what it comes out is that Taisvis seems to be giving a few different rationales that can be exceptions. Meaning, if it's a sakana, okay, it can be mekli, you could do for more than kadei shavya. And therefore, many paiskim in different ifanim say that if there's real life-threatening danger to the victim who's kidnapped, then all the rules are gone, and you could save the person for as much money as they want for him. Now, there's many machmirim on the shayla. And this really starts with the Shut Maram, the Maram Lublin. I want to talk about that tshuva and the tshuva that backs it up, and then we'll see. Then we'll get to the halacha l'maisa. The Maram Lublin has a shayla as follows. He says there was a bacher who was nitvas with a zayni yishmaelis. He was caught in a compromising situation with a zayni yishmaelis, and they arrested him, and they threatened either to kill him or convert him. This is what they said. This is the shayla that's presented to the Maram Lublin. They threatened to kill him or convert him. Are you allowed to save this guy? Not are you allowed to? Are you mechuyev to save this guy for whatever they're asking, for more than his value? They're asking an exorbitant amount of money. Are you mechuyev or not mechuyev? Says the Maram Lublin, and this is what's interesting. Hishbrach says the Maram Lublin, me'olam le'shamanu shum paisik. He says we never heard of any paisik say that you could go keneged this Mishnah and be paid the shavi yasim echlei damav and be paid the someone who's kidnapped for more than he's worth. And therefore he says, this person, this bacher who was caught in this situation, you can't be paid to him, he has to stay. And he says, if you're going to tell me because they want to kill
We didn't find any Paisik who makes this distinction, who makes this chilik, and says that if they're going to kill him, you're allowed to save him for any money in the world. We don't find that he says. He says, he says, I can bring you a raya from Rabbi Yaakov Weil. There's a tshuva from the Mari Weil, who brings a story from the Tkufas Rishainim with Rabbi Avram Ezra and his family, who were kidnapped, and a very similar shaila, and how they didn't paskin like that, and they didn't pay exorbitant sums to release the kidnapped victims. So he has a halacha l'maisa, he has a maisa rav from an old tshuva, from an old story that happened, in the Tkufas Rishainim, together with his position that halacha l'maisa, this is what the halacha is supposed to be, and therefore he stands by this. Now, for everybody, it's in the Erech Lechem asks it, and the Beis Hillel asks it, and others ask it. It seems that the Maram missed the Tosfos. Tosfos in Gittin that we said, Lahedius, Tosfos says on the Gemara of B'Shua ben Chananya, who says he's willing to save a child, for any money in the world. Tosfos says clearly that Heichadikas Hakanas Nefashis, all bets are off. It seems like the Maram Lublin missed the Tosfos. The Maram Lublin says Lo Yishtamet B'Shum Paisik to say this, and we know that it's a Tosfos Mefureshes. It's not even obscure. It's a basic Tosfos in Gittin. Now, in general, when someone says that the Maram missed the Tosfos, that's usually a raya that he didn't miss the Tosfos, meaning it's not obscure. If it was, I don't know, something that's obscure, you tell me he missed it, I hear. Tosfos in Gittin, the Maram didn't miss. So you have to figure out, so what happened over here? So there's a tshuva from the Knesset Yecheskel, who's, a dar or two later. This is written like in the early 1700s. Like I think the tshuva is in 1730, B'erach. Knesset Yecheskel writes as follows. He has his tshuva is about another big tzaddik. I'll just read you who the guy is, just who we're talking about his captivity. He says as follows: Be'isha echad, sheyasav bechatzar matari is in prison, karav l'sakanos nefashis. It seems they're going to kill him. Ve'ishahu meforsim drachav leitayvim. It's well known who this guy is. Noyef v'ganef. Him mutaleim leftaisi lefazel v'mayis. Are we mechuyev to really pump a lot of money into this, to dump a lot of money at him, free this guy from captivity or not? So now he brings the tshuva from the Ram Lublin that says that you're not obligated even when there's a sakana. And he asks, the Avi's Kasha, he brings down, Bagayin Rav Shmuel Koidenover, he says in the Beis Hillel, asks on him that, Ishtamitze a Tosfos, he forgot a Tosfos in Gittin, that clearly says that when it's sakanas tefashis, all bets are off. He says, L'aniyas daiti hepachu. And this is the Knesset Yecheskel's work through over here. And I'm not going to get into the weeds with him, but what he basically says is as follows. He says that the Gemara, like we know, gives two reasons, right? The Gemara says one is taxing the tzibur in too intensive a way, and one is that we don't want to create motivation for people to take more captives. He says Tosfos, if you look, almost always gives two terutzim. Tosfos says either he was a Talmud Chacham, like he was a kid who could be a Talmud Chacham, or it was sakanas nefashis. He says I don't understand. In Kol Terakul, the rule is sakanas nefashis is deicha everything. Right? If the rule over here would apply the same rule, that when there's life-threatening danger, then all bets are off and you're allowed to free him, then Tosfos doesn't have to say anything else. The conversation's over. Just say, you're good to go. Tosfos doesn't have to say anything more than that. He says, from the fact that Tosfos brings a second teretz, tells you that the answer of sakanas nefashis didn't suffice enough. He says, Vais the two reasons that the Gemara gives, each one needs its own resolution. Tosfos says, there's two problems over here. There's a problem of taxing the tzibur. When it comes to taxing the tzibur, sakanas nefashis, that outweighs taxing the tzibur. There's no limit to how much you can tax the tzibur to save a life. He says, second of all, is we don't want people to create motivation. That it wouldn't work sakanas nefashis because that's also sakanas nefashis. Meaning, if I tell you we don't want to create motivation for the kidnapper to kidnap more people, you're going to tell me, but it's sakanas nefashis. Yeah, but it's going to be sakanas nefashis the next round. It's one sakanas nefashis versus another sakanas nefashis. The only thing that could possibly resolve that is like the Ramban says, if it's a Talmud Chacham, that Klal Yisrael is really going to suffer from his loss, so that breaks the whole paradigm, and that's a different thing. It says Tosfos is giving two different roots to two different problems. So says the Knesset Yecheskel, since we know that the halacha is we were not machriya, the Rif and the Rosh and the Rishonim all say we weren't machriya between the two reasons. We don't know which reason is the primary reason. I would say even if it's sakanas nefashis, that's not enough. That just resolves the reason of taxing the tzibur. That never resolves the reason of creating motivation to continue going. So says the Knesset Yecheskel, Ram Lublin is right. Le'matzinu shum paisik who says that with that alone you could suffice and say, do whatever money it costs. Not true. That's only answering a small segment of the problem. This is what some of the Gedolei Achronim, the Knesset Yecheskel and Ram Lublin say, that Mela you can't be paid the shvuyin. So now let's fast forward to modern day Paiskim. So who talks about it today? So modern day Paiskim, Rabbi Vadia has the biggest tshuva on this. Rabbi Vadia and Chelik Yod and Yabi Omer has a tshuva. It's in Chesh Mishpat Tshuva Vav. It's called Mishpat an Tebi LaHalacha. It's written 6 years later. 6 years after the Dawson's Field kidnapping was the famed Entebbe kidnapping, where the government seemed to have reached out to the Rabbanut, to the Rabbanim and the Rabbanut, and consulted with them about, making trades for hostages or not. And Rabbi Vadia, based on that conversation, has a long tshuva. And I just want to read you something interesting, because in the tshuva he writes, and this is, we don't have confirmation from many of the rest of these people. That's why I want to read you this. He writes as follows: V'hine b'hisasef rashayam gedolei haTorah l'adam b'nei sazeh b'chinas halacha. He says we had a meeting with the gedolei haTorah to sit down and discuss this inyan of redeeming, making a trade and redeeming our hostages for their hostages in a way we were going to overpay lahalacha. And here there's a star where he says this was not in the first edition. This is like in the second edition of Ebi Omer. He added this in. He says as follows: V'yashavnu yachad im hagrish el yashiv v'hagrisha zarbach v'hagoyin Reb Tzalel Zolti v'hagoyin Reb Eliezer Goldschmidt Reb Shaul Yisraeli Reb Tzin Abashol. So it's a pretty heavy-hitting group of Rabbanim who got together to discuss the question. He says, and we passed on our psak, he says, to the Rosh Memshalah, and we said as follows, that he says, Amnam Barar Hadavar, of course we agree, Sheshichur HaMechablim HaNedrashim, to free the terrorists that they're demanding we free, is Taimin B'Teiche Sakanas Rabbis. It could lead to many unintended consequences. It could be very dangerous. And this is written when they didn't really understand how dangerous yet. I mean, today this equation keeps getting more and more understood, meaning how dangerous it is to release terrorists for hostages. Now, he says, we understand that it could lead to some sakanas. Since those who are in captivity currently are present in current and present danger of being killed, they're in present sakanas nefashis. Levia halacha, sakana zu shel hachatufim machras is sakana shebeshikra machablim. The sakana, the present danger of the people who are in captivity outweighs the potential future danger of the people who are going to be impacted by freeing some terrorists to get these people out. And therefore he says you could do, the government, this is what the Rabbanim were saying, the government could do whatever is needed and is necessary to free these hostages. Find a little tefillah at the end that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us that we shouldn't find ourselves in this situation. So Rabbi Vadia is bringing, and this is something that some of these other, Rabbi Yashiv, L'mashal, I'll show you, elsewhere it's brought down that he held like this. The Stipler is brought down elsewhere that he held like this, but some of the people on this list never spoke about this or wrote about this again. Rabbi Vadia is saying that in a meeting where he sat with these Gedolim, this was the hachra that they sent, seemingly not like the Knesset Yecheskel and not like the Meram Lublin, and saying that even though it's Yosem Uchtei Demeim, trading one person for 100 terrorists is certainly more than the value of one person. Meaning the dollar value, however, there's many places we're not going to go into that now, but how exactly to ascertain what the dollar value of a person is. But certainly trading 100 terrorists supersedes that value. And still, these Gedolei HaPoskim seem to have felt that Heyois, one is a Vadei Sakana, and one is only a potential future Sakana. We say the rule of Sakanas Nefashis Deicha everything, and we save them. Now, what's the rationale for this? Rabbi Vadi's tshuva is long. It's a long Arichas tshuva where he stam holds that the Meram Lublin is not the halacha. He's chaylik. He brings many other Sfaradish Poskim who are chaylik in the Meram Lublin and shows much precedent in history that the Welt didn't paskin like the Meram Lublin. Meaning the Welt always nam done that if it's sakana, you throw everything at the wall. You do everything you can. So he brings a lot of rights that we don't hold like the Meram Lublin. Rabbi Yashiv, interestingly enough, in brought down elsewhere, his son-in-law Rabbi Silverstein brings it down somewhere else. He says as follows. He says, "Hey, this is a shayla that was never. There's not a psak to this question. This is a halacha she'ein a psuka. The Gemara blibes, kilu tzarchin on these two reasons. And the Meram Lublin, Al Kapanim, the way the Knesset Yecheskel explains him, is really just saying, hey, we don't know which reason to go with. You have to be machmer like both. Says Rabbi Yashiv, that's being machmer like both is something you say when there's no sakanas nefashis on the table. Being machmer like both is when you're mesupik, Yosef Uchtei, it's going to cost you money, but there's no danger on the table. It's a shayla spending a lot of money, so we say be machmer like both rationales. But when it's a sakanas nefashis and someone's going to be in danger, he says then ukmi dina, like on the main din, the algemeine din of kol terakula, that sakanas nefashis is deich everything. That's Rabbi Yashiv felt. So Rabbi Yashiv and Rabbi Vadia and possibly Rabbi Shlomo Zalman seem to have held that even though the Meram Lublin and the Knesset Yecheskel seem to say that the halacha is you don't save a hostage more than his value, that's not the halacha l'maaseh today. Now the Stipler in Orchos Rabbeinu, and this is interesting, the Stipler in Orchos Rabbeinu was asked about a government who was freeing a lot of hostages to get hostages out. And the person who was asking the Stipler, obviously, I'm not sure actually what his opinion is. He asked the Stipler what he holds about it, and the Stipler told him as follows. The Stipler says, l'maaseh, we don't have to be machmer on this and not free them. The halacha is you could free them, it's pikuach nefesh. A person could say, come dina, I hold like the shita, not like this, and he's allowed to do, we're allowed to free slaves. He says, but if you have a government that's not willing to make the trade, you can't get so upset at the government, he says. They have good solid ground to stand on. So the Stipler, seems, if you're asking him his opinion, he's saying like a Yashiv, like a Ravadia, make the trade, whatever it is, you do the trade. But if a government doesn't want to, no, they also have a leg to stand on. Now, this shaila, it keeps coming up again and again. The Rabasha Weiss in the Tshuva from 2 years ago has the shaila, and there's no 100% way that everyone's going to be comfortable with to rate the risks, on each side. Befrat, you're talking about governments, there's so many other rationales and cheshbainis and zachen, so it's very hard to know, how to dan the risk of potential future damages versus the current damages. When is it too much? When is it overwhelming? When is it really present sakanas nefashos right now on both sides? So it's very hard, but upon him, these Gedolei Poskim in a shaila in the 1970s seem to have done this way. Now I want to just end off with one more nakuda, and maybe this is something that I could talk about more in detail a different time. And this is just, we're handling over here really the question of collective sakanas nefashos versus individual sakanas nefashos. Meaning you have a person who's, let's say, a hostage, who finds himself under imminent threat of death, right? The terrorist group that's holding him says, we want Yahya Sinwar out of prison for him, right? We want him and 100 of his closest friends out of prison with him. Now, any rational person understands that down the road, freeing these people is going to lead to more death. There's no question. These are people, these are killers. It's going to lead to more death. Navas, what is it? It's a question. It's a question of one person's current, present, 100% danger. Right now, he faces 100% danger. If he stays there, he will be killed. Versus a suffix of the tzibur later on, meaning there'll be some, negative consequence down the line, but it's not going to be any specific person. It's not going to be 100%. It's going to be some sort of undefined consequence down the line. And how do you rate, one person's specific, very quantifiable danger versus future danger for the tzibur? Now, this is Yerushalmi that's relevant on the sugya, and this has many applications. And those are some of the things we could go into maybe in the future. Lamashal, organ transplants, or there's a lot of hechatimtas where the shaila comes up. Well, I could talk about it in a second, but the Yerushalmi says as follows. I want to read you Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says like this. Tani. It's a Yerushalmi in the end of Trumas. It's a famous Yerushalmi. It's like the main sugya that handles this shaila, and there's a lot of different ways to go with it. The Yerushalmi says as follows. Tana. Siyas b'nei adam shayim mahalchim baderech. There was a group of people that were traveling on the way. Upagu lahem goyim va'amru. A group of goyim confronted them and said, Tnu lanu echad mehem v'nahara goysei. Give us one of you, and we're going to kill him. V'mlav, if you don't give us one of you as like a sacrificial lamb for us to kill, hareinu hargim es kolchem. We're going to massacre the entire group over here. So here you have a case of one person's very present, current danger versus potential threats for the rest of the group. So the Gemara says as follows: Afilu kulam neragim, even if it's going to cause everybody to be killed, la yimsru nefesh achas miYisrael. We don't give over anybody. But yichtu lahem echad. If the Goyim said, we want Pliny, they came to the group and they said, give us Ruvain. Ruvain owes us something. Ruvain did something bad. We want Ruvain. Kigoyin Sheva ben Bechri, like Sheva ben Bechri, which is a story in Navi and Shmuel, in Shmuel Bey's Parak Chaf. The Shmuel tells the story that there was Sheva ben Bechri who was murdered ben Malchus against David HaMelech. David HaMelech sent his army, his general Yoav, to go capture him. Yoav encircles the city where he's hiding, and he says, either give me Sheva ben Bechri or I'm going to break in here and it's going to cause, death and harm to the entire city. And the city decides, yeah, you're right, Sheva ben Bechri is a murdered melech, he deserves to be killed. Have Sheva ben Bechri. Actually, I don't think they give him, they kill Sheva ben Bechri themselves and give him his head. Meaning here, your work is done, you have nothing to fight with us, and Yoav Taka recedes away. Yoav leaves. So says the Gemara Yerushalmi, Kagoin Sheva ben Bechri, then Yimsu Roisim Val Yaregu. Then give over that person who's deserves to be killed, who needs to be killed, and don't have everybody else. Now here there's a machlekes in the Gemara how to understand this. Amr Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Rav Lakish says, "V'hu sheyechayev misik Sheva ben Bechri." It has to be that the individual that they're singling out and saying, "Give us him," and we won't endanger the rest of you, is someone who's mechuyev misa on his own. He deserves to be killed. Then if they say, "Give us the guy who's already guilty, who deserves to be killed," we say, "No problem, give him up and don't let everybody else become endangered." Rav Yochanan says, "Af bi she'enechayev misik Sheva ben Bechri." No, even if he has no pre-existing chayev misa. It's just that he's clearly the person who's endangering everybody, meaning he's innocent as the driven snow. He doesn't deserve to be killed. But it's his life versus everybody else's, you're allowed to sacrifice him. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail of how this sugya becomes in all the different contexts. Maybe we'll go into it in a different week. But actually, this is a Gemara that really frames a lot of these same questions of collective danger versus personal danger. And you have to know how to integrate this into this whole shmooze. Maybe I'll leave this for a separate time. Maybe we'll go into this. All right, shkayach.
How does it work? How do we learn places?
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.